But when they go away, good men come back. Today, we live in such a country. A country which, if God were to judge us correctly, ought not to exist on the face of the earth. It ought to have received the treatment of Sodom and Gomorrah. But the only beauty in Kenya is that God has found 50 people. That is the only reason why God still preserved this country. But his patience is running out. Our cup of iniquity is getting filled by the day, and we do not know it. How is it getting filled by the day? On a daily basis, we are becoming a country where greed is celebrated. We give men and women opportunity to serve, and they steal from us. We give men and women the opportunity to preside over our health services. They acquire expired drugs, and women die, and children die. We are accusing Adolf Hitler of Holocaust. That is Holocaust of another kind. We are giving men and women the opportunity to preside over our transport department. They take the money, compromise the quality of our roads, and men and women die on those roads. And then we say that that is not genocide. It is genocide. And those men claim to be Christians. We give men and women the opportunity to preside over our counties. And our nurses are on strike for 1 month. And our doctors are on strike for 1 month. And not the president, not the opposition leader, not any member of parliament talks about it. And we celebrate them because of our ethnicity. You, the Kikuyu, say, Modo wa Nyuba. You, the Luo, say, Oduadu. And you, the Kamba, say, Osa Vinyamo Kamba. How can a country run that way? How can a country run that way? And we claim to be Christians, and we are so corrupt. We are destroying the next generation. And that is why James, in the book that was read at chapter 5, verses 1 to 8, tells and warns them that you oppressors, the gold and silver that you have acquired shall corrode. All these things that you have acquired that make you feel important, it is nothing. The great Alexander the Great, who had conquered half the known world before the birth of Christ, at his deathbed, instructed the doctors to prepare a coffin with his hands outstretched, that it may be known to the world that you came with nothing and you go with nothing. And he asked that the pallbearers be his doctors to tell the world that when death cometh, even the doctors cannot stop it. Yet in our vanity, we believe that when we acquire things, then we are immunizing ourselves from something. The last time I checked, greed is like drinking salty water. The more you drink, the more you want. But your thirst will never be sated. We have individuals in our communities, including ourselves, who engage in graft and corruption either wittingly or unwittingly. But most of it is wittingly. And we celebrate these individuals. In Kenya today, when I look at the men and women in the opposition, when I look at men and women in government, and I remember that not so long ago I had the advantage of working in an organization that investigated them. I'm bound by the oath of secrecy, but I can generally say, I look at them and say, God save Kenya. God save Kenya. These are the individuals who will save Kenya. These are the individuals, the pharaohs who have acquired the garbs of Moses, cheating us that they are Moses and they are pharaohs in disguise. God save Kenya. The tragedy is that the Kenyans either do not know or do not care. But I suspect that they know, and they have simply chosen to do what was described by the prophet Isaiah. They have eyes, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. They have a form of Christianity, and Christianity has only become a fig leaf with which we hide our moral nakedness. We must interrogate our Christianity, because if it were true that being Christians immunize us from greed, then this country would be one of the countries with the least corruption in the world. It cannot be right that we are 80% Christian, we claim, and we are one of the most corrupt nations in Africa and on earth. This corruption that is alive and well in us. It is alive and well in us because we think that corruption and the things that we have acquired illegally are going to save us. But when you read the book of Luke, that conversation between Christ himself and that rich man, the young rich man comes forth and said, "Good teacher, good teacher, what do I do to go to heaven?" Follow the commandment, Christ says in his divine soft voice. And he says, "I've followed all those commandments from my boyhood." But then Christ said, "But there is one that you have not done. Go out and sell your things. Once you have sold them, distribute them to the poor. Then you shall, having unburdened yourself, go to heaven." And the young man goes out, possibly shaking his head and saying, "Now I cannot go beyond that point." And Christ possibly pointing at him and telling his disciples, "I tell you, how difficult shall it be for a rich man to go into the kingdom of God? It would be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to get into heaven." Christ is not condemning wealth. Christ is simply condemning the worship of wealth. Because the same Bible says that you should have enough for your children's children up to the fourth generation, but by the sweat of your brow, by the sweat of your brow, not by taking things that belong to others. What we are condemning and what Christ is condemning is that we should not use our position to acquire things that don't belong to us. And I'm submitting to us that one of the reasons why Africa and Kenya will never realize their potential is that our appetite for that which is evil has been sharpened. Waswahili wanasema kinolewacho hupata. Our appetites are so sharpened that our conscience is seared. Our conscience is numb. We can no longer tell the difference between good and evil. And because we cannot tell the difference between good and evil, we engage in good and evil on a daily basis. And that is why Isaiah says, "Woe unto you who call light day and day light." And corruption is to be found in very many places. Corruption is not only to be found in the political arena. Corruption is found even in churches today. You know, a friend of mine with whom we don't agree on many things, but we agreed on this one, once told me, the church has become so mechanical, so structured in form, that there is no space for Christ and God. And that I thought was very deep. We have structured our worship services in such a way that God is only mentioned occasionally, that God is only worshipped occasionally. And I normally sometimes ask myself, how was Christ worshiping? Christ was an itinerant preacher who engaged in dialogue on a daily basis. Christ would come and find a few people and engage them in a discourse on matters of the heaven. When he talks about the parables of the unleavened bread, when he talks about the parable of the sower, when he talks about the parables of the wheat and the tares, Christ is an itinerant preacher. He did not have a title. Today we are hankering up after titles. There is no shortage of apostles and bishops in this part of the world. Woe unto them on the day of judgment. They'll be told, we know you not. So the question is, we who are seated here, we who are Kenyans, we who know what is good and right, are we the salt of the earth or we are the light of the earth? This is the question that we must ask. What is our contribution? I'm told at one time by a friend, whether this is a true story or is an apocryphal story, I do not know. But in some airport in the Middle East, that there was a signpost saying, you can leave your goods here, they are no Christians.